It is now my pleasure to welcome Adele Ferguson and her all-star digital panel. Adele, take it away.
Thank you everybody for coming. Hope you can hear me. Unfortunately, Karen Stocks from Twitter is unable to be with us today. She had to go to the United States unexpectedly, but she has sent us a video. Tracy Fellows is the head of REA. So would you give us a few minutes speech about this topic that we're looking at today?
So, you know, it's nice to be able to talk to a group like this about two topics that I'm pretty passionate about, one being the digital economy and digital innovation, and the other diversity. And I think about REA, and I've only been the CEO of REA for a little less than a year, but I think about what our company has achieved, and in those 20 years really helped to transform an industry. First by people buying their properties, being able to see their properties that they were looking for online, but once you digitize something, there's a whole range of experiences that you make very different, whether that's applying for a rental application to find a home, whether that's trying to find a home loan, whether that's when you move, how you connect utilities. There's just a whole range of things that became possible in a very different way because that experience was now able to be digitized. But of course, as a company that really had their success from disrupting an industry, we're very acutely aware that we need to keep innovating ourselves, otherwise we too could be disrupted. And that's where I think about the link to diversity, because it is much more difficult when you're a successful organization to think about how you disrupt yourself at multiple levels. And one of the ways I think you guard against that is by having a large group of people who work for you from diverse experiences, diverse backgrounds, and yes, diversity of gender. If you have a lot of people who are the same, there is a real risk of getting a group think. And that's one, I think, the failures for companies that fail to keep pace or indeed innovate beyond themselves. So for us, diversity is as much about that diversity of thinking, which will come in all shapes and sizes, in age, in background, and very much in gender. And that really guides so much of why we think diversity is important at REA. We do have a population today that's 40% women, 60% male, and in our senior ranks, a similar ratio. We have goals that we're setting for diversity, which is to have 50-50. We know we want to achieve that goal within a year, but we have a plan to get us there. We also recognize, though, that in some parts of our population base, that's a little harder to achieve, but equally as attainable and just as important to attain. We're a company that makes a great deal of our IP. In fact, what we build is everything that our company is the people who create it. So we have a large number of technologists, engineers who work in our organization. And that's really where we see the shortfall, and I'm sure it'll come up with a range of the people on the panel. But if there is a shortage of STEM students going into universities across the country, there are even less of them who are females. And so we think about that as the beginning of that funnel of the talent that can come into our organization. So how do we get more young girls at school making the right subject choices at that point of high school to give them more options when they're going on into university? And I think a part of that is a stigma of what people may have thought, being a programmer was, because it's so different now to perhaps what their preconception of it is. So first it is getting that diversity into the schools. And then, of course, for us, it is making sure we bring that talent into our organization. And just as importantly, developing that talent within the organization so they can be the female leaders of tomorrow that we aspire to have. For us, as we think about that, like many companies, we think about programs that encourage mentoring across young female talent that comes into the organization. We don't think about mentoring or coaching exclusively for females, but certainly as part of that. And then also retaining that talent after they've perhaps taken breaks when they have children. How do we make it easy and be flexible about different ways we bring people back? I'll wrap up with maybe just one, what brought home to me the importance of diversity. We have had our kickoff last week, and we gave awards to our employees. One of the highest awards was actually won by a female graduate. She's just come on as a full-time employee, but a female graduate. And she won an award for an innovative product idea and implementation that she did. As a graduate, came up, had the suggestion of how we could implement something and won this award as a result of it. But her father was in technology, and she tells the story of being a young girl being taught how to program by her dad. If more women had that, more girls had that experience, and how do we make sure that they get at least exposed to that without having to just rely on a dad who maybe had that as a job, to see the range of opportunities that exist. And if we have more people like her in our company and across the economy, I think that's a great thing for us to aspire to. That's it from me. Adele?
Thank you, Tracy. Now we have Pip Marlowe from Microsoft. Would you like to tell us what you think about the topic on technology and women?
Sure. Well, I have to start by saying I was walking over here. Our office is just next door. I thought, wow, I have the best job in the world. I'm getting paid to have lunch with a couple of my mates, some of my best friends. I thought, who else gets paid to do that? I thought, what a great job. So I'm thrilled to be here.
There are other people here, don't you?
Yeah, but with all of my new friends as well. So it is great to be talking about, I think, as Tracy said, I think something you'll hear from all of us, it's an area we're really passionate about as women. It is people actually just running businesses and seeing the power of diverse workforces. I guess one of the reasons I'd start by saying I'm keen and really passionate about the diversity side is I came from a very working class family. My mother was one of 8 children. She was a nun, obviously not when she had me, but just to clarify. Yeah, she left the convent and had me. And I was one of 5 children. And, we was a very working class family. And the thing that happened in my house is the chores were gender agnostic. So if it was my turn to get the firewood in, it was my turn to get the firewood in. And if it was the boys' turn to cook breakfast, it was the boys' turn to do that. We didn't have jobs for girls or jobs for boys. We just had jobs that we're all supposed to do. That was the way, I was brought up. And I think, when I see the workplace or see the rest of the environment today, I can still see that those lines are not as clear. And I want my 2 girls to have the opportunity to do anything that they can. And there's still some change for us to drive. So let me sort of pull back a little bit from that. Where I would start is saying we care about women leaders in innovation and disruption for a lot of reasons. But first of all, from my perspective, my customers are diverse. And so when I think about mirroring the market we serve, it's a really important way for us to do that is actually to create these diverse workforces. And our we're not quite as strong as Tracy. We've got about 34% of our workforce is female. 39% of our people management community is female, and about 44% of my leadership team is female. And I was lucky, I adopted a lot of good work that my predecessor, my old boss here, did. So I was able to build on the work that Tracy did in Microsoft Australia before she did that. And through that, having that diverse workforce, you certainly get to think about how do you disrupt yourself and how do you continue to innovate. And I think that's really important in a time that we're talking about right now, which is this digital economy that we're in. And for me, there's lots of stories you hear about today. Uber, largest, taxi company in the world, but they don't own a car. Or Airbnb provides more rooms every night, but doesn't own a hotel room. And they're great examples of organisations that have been born out of creating disruptive business models. And I think for the last 20 years of technology and innovation, a lot of the innovation is what I'd call product innovation, like people delivering new and exciting new products. I think where we're at now is this opportunity or this platform where a lot of the innovation will be around business model transformation. And that's what Uber did, that's what Airbnb did. But the story I love the most right now is actually Netflix. And the reason I like Netflix is, to the point Tracy made, is they disrupted themselves. When Netflix started out, their value proposition was the product, the same as me watching a video that I got from Blockbuster, or me sending them my list, and then they would mail me my DVDs, and then I would send them back. and I would avoid that late payment. But then what they did is they disrupted themselves and they created their online streaming business where you could absolutely get instant gratification. But in all of those cases, the product was pretty much the same. The movie I got from Blockbuster to the movie they mailed me in the post to what I downloaded. But what has happened over this time now in this digital world is the business model disruption that allows you to disrupt your competitors is, at the best time ever. And it's interesting, I have to play Windows 10 bingo. I started the company 20 years ago, and it was 1995. And it was, Jane actually was, I think, a product manager at the time. You started in 89. And it was the year of Windows 95. And at that time, we had people lining out, streets outside Harvey Norman for Windows 95. And through the last 20 years, we have been subject to a lot of disruption ourselves. And those things are humbling, they're learning experiences, but they teach you to disrupt yourself and get better at that. And 20 years later, we launched Windows 10 last night. And I sort of think I'm more excited to see the next 20 years of innovation. Because I think what we have today with social, and Karen, if she was here, would talk a lot to that, but mobile technology, cloud technology, what companies like REA are doing today and what Pandora are doing, they're incredible sets of innovation. I think it's just amazing to be seeing what's next to change the world that we're in.
Yeah, no, you make some very good points, and I think BlackBerry is one of the examples that didn't try and disrupt itself, so it's almost dead, really. I say it because I used to be an avid BlackBerry person. Yeah.
I bet a lot of people in this room were.
Yeah. Next is Jane Huxley from Pandora. If you'd like to give us a few minutes of your thoughts.
Thanks, Adele. I, again, having been colleagues with these two from many, many years ago, I too just want to start with a little story about, and correct me if I'm wrong, ladies, I know that you're normally not shy, about why it is that the three of us are sitting up on this stage as now the chief executives of significantly sized organisations in Australia. Pandora is small but growing. Why is it that we are now running these organisations? What happened to us? What made us different? And as we start to think about equity in the workplace and gender balance and diversity, what are some of the things that we need to do and some of the things that we need to start thinking through to ensure that three female CEOs sitting on a stage at a lunch won't be a curiosity 5 years from now? And I think that's really where the rubber hits the road. There is something that binds the three of us together, and it is a person. And that person is a man, a champion of change from 20, 30 years ago, and his name is Steve Vamos. He came to run Microsoft, having been at IBM and Apple. He came to Microsoft in the late 90s, and all three of us had the pleasure of working directly for him or with him. Now, this is, 20 years ago, feels like 10, feels like 5 actually, 20 years ago that we were fortunate enough to meet this man, and I've got a number of personal stories with Steve myself which formed an absolute turning point in my life, a pivotal turning point in my career. We don't have the time to go into those stories today, but I'll tell you that the one thing that he once said to me, which really I think is a great credit to putting us a lot of us on this stage now, is he used the words, "I believe in you." I believe in you, and I believe that you have a lot of potential. And that was always accompanied by the word, but. Here are the things that you need to work on, and here's what I'm going to do to help you. This model, as we now know it, is a model of sponsorship. And a sponsor is very different from a mentor. It's very different from a coach. A sponsor, a champion of change, or a male champion of change, as many of them are called now, is somebody who says to you, I believe in you, I believe you have potential, and I'm going to stake my reputation on your success. I am going to speak for you. I am going to support you. I am going to be in the back room and the front room talking about you. And that's what a sponsor is. And Steve, through our careers, has sponsored all of us and continues to do so to this day. Steve introduced me to a mentor, Di Ryle, who was the first managing director of Apple, who'd gone on to battle breast cancer and then left and is now running a very successful company called Explore for Success, which focuses on working with women as they move into more senior roles. And working with Di through Steve, she taught me some very, very basic skills that I believe all women need to know. One of the things that Di taught me was to understand what my value was. What is my value to the company? And how to negotiate for that value. 4 months later, Steve asked me to take a new job inside of Microsoft. And I said to him, great, I'll take that new job, but instead of just taking that job and moving offices as I would have done a year earlier, I said to him, here's what it's going to cost you for me to take that job. He was doubly pissed off because he'd paid for the mentoring. And then I came back and negotiated with the salary on that next role. And then we all have coaches in our lives. And the coaches are the ones that give us the skills. They teach us the behaviours, and importantly, they give us feedback. And it's these cornerstones of sponsorship, of mentoring, and of coaching, all of which have a slightly different role, that I believe that we as women and men in the room all really need to focus on very clearly to start to change the world in terms of equity, in terms of diversity, and in terms of pay gaps. We talk about young kids coming up. And, you know, when I think about this issue, and I thought about it in the plane on the way here this morning, I asked myself 2 questions around this women issue, this female thing that we keep talking about. Number 1, is it actually in our heads? And number 2, is it generational? Is it something that will go away with time? Frankly, that's not good enough if that's the right answer, because it's not going to go fast enough for me if it's generational. But I looked at my 2 kids last night. They get 2 girls, 5 and 8, Satan and Lucifer, I like to call them. Don't tweet that. They're on social media at their age. They get half an hour, 30 minutes to 60 minutes of iPad time every night, depending on how large my glass of wine is. And I'm sitting on the sofa last night thinking about what I'm going to talk about today, and you know, there's my oldest child, Emma, and she's on the iPad, and she's using a program called Crayola Creativity Studio. Basically, what they do is they colour and draw fashion, and then they take a photo of it, and this app then allows that fashion to be seen on a walking model. They accessorize. Very, very creative, online, offline, blah, blah, blah. There's my other child, Lucy. She's on Minecraft. And I look at the 2 of them and think, God, that just sums the 2 of them up. One on Minecraft and one on the creative thing. And then Lucy, age 5, drops the iPad. Oh, aliens, aliens, aliens. And so I don't know what happens in Minecraft, but apparently aliens can appear out of nowhere. And she runs over to Emma, who puts down Crayola Creative Studio, and she says, can you help me? Emma grabs the iPad. They're battling with these aliens, and they're killing, and they're digging, and they're whatever you do in Minecraft. And Lucy gets bored of Emma killing the aliens, so she's picked up the creative Crayola Studio, and she's cracking on with the fashion. And I looked at that and I thought, my God, there it is right there. We talk about kids needing to get into STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And that is, in fact, what those 2 children were doing using the iPad last night. Coding, technology, engineering, it's all about logic and problem solving. And that's exactly what they were doing. They were collaborating, they were pivoting, they were problem solving, they were using their logic, and importantly, they were using their creativity to achieve whatever it is that they wanted to achieve. And it's the point that I make that I do think that this is generational. I do think that we are breeding a generation of children that simply will not accept pay gaps. They simply will not accept boards that don't show true diversity. They simply will not accept management teams and companies that are not fairly representative of the population. And let me tell you, if you are a company 20 years from now, my 2 kids are the kids that you're going to want to hire our children are the kids you're going to want to hire. And if you are not representative of their world and their population, they'll look at your job and they will say, no, thank you. And that's what success is going to look like as we move forward.
Thank you. Fascinating. We're going to try one more time to see if we can go to the message from America. So fingers crossed.
Hello from sunny San Francisco. This is Karen Stocks. Sorry I couldn't be with you in person, but technology is great, but we still haven't figured out how to be in two places at once. So I'm coming to you from video, recording a short message in lieu of me sitting there with you. So a little bit of a background about myself. I've been with Twitter now for nearly 2 years. I came to Twitter from Google, and prior to that, I'd been at Vodafone for 12 to 13 years. So I've been in the tech space for quite a long time, seeing the industry fundamentally change, and really excited that we're here talking around how we get women involved in technology, how we get women involved in media, and how we can really drive forward with a completely diversified workforce. Australia is a really great place to be when it comes to technology, and the three main key reasons that I see why we're going to excel in this space is, firstly, we've got great talent. Our education system is world class, and we see that with some of the big companies that set up with Australia and really drive engineer graduates and a lot of other industries into the marketplace. Secondly, we're a very open country and we're really willing to try new technologies and adapt those. And thirdly, this is Australia, so what a great place to attract talent. A lot of times when I'm talking to people overseas, they're really keen to come to Australia, so we need to tap our experience, our geography, and our open-mindedness to really build the tech industry in Australia. And the beauty about multinational tech companies in Australia is that we're seeing a lot of great female leadership. My fellow panelists, who I can't be with you today, and we're seeing that in other companies as well. And the way I think about it is this industry is changing so rapidly that there's no history, there's no bench strength. So there's no reason women shouldn't be leading these companies. And we're seeing women lead them because they're putting up their hands, they're taking the bull by the horns, and they're driving change from the top. And I'm really looking forward to continually seeing that happen. Education is going to play a big role in preparing our youth and our next generation for the digital economy. You know, when I go to career advice, I still see a lot of the traditional subjects. When I went with my daughter, I didn't see information technology or engineering up there. It was all around biology and maths and English. So how do we change the visibility for students so they see technology as a career? When I look back at the jobs I've taken, none of the companies I worked for existed when I went to university. So how do we become career advisors? How do we train people in high school, in university, for those jobs that don't even exist yet? It's a big challenge that we have to face as an industry. And one thing I'd like to leave you with, a question for the panel to discuss, is when we talk about diversification, is diversification just about our hiring methodology, or do we need to fundamentally restructure our businesses? Sorry I couldn't be with you. Have a great day, and I'll hopefully see you all later.
Thank you. I'm going to ask some questions, but I want this to be really inclusive. So if anyone has any compelling questions that they want to ask, please put up your hand and tell me to shut up, and I'll point to you. Okay, so firstly, this week's been a pretty exciting week for women. It really started with the ANZ put out a very comprehensive report. It was very sobering. It was a lot of figures that we already knew about the pay gender gap, but it also put it more into perspective. It said that, you know, there's a 19% gap in pay on average between men and women, which we do know that. It then went on to say that that's equivalent to about $295 a week. And if you extrapolate that over a career of 40 years, it's $700,000, which is a massive amount of money. So there are issues. It had a lot of other statistics, but it really got the ball rolling for today. Mm-hmm. So how do we bridge that gap? You know, we've heard everyone here talk about education and disruption and whatever, but how do we bridge this gap in pay? Does it stem from education and the types of courses that people study? Is it generational? What is it? Pip?
Yeah, look, I'd have a couple of comments. And I think if, you look at that study, it talks to, one, the roles that women are in, and two, the fact that at some point in your career, you'll probably take carer's leave. Often, in my household, I'm the only one who can have a child, so I'm the one who's going to, do that. And so that time when you step out of your career and then step back in. And so I think there's a couple of things. One is, and I think, Karen touched on it a bit too in her video, we do need to encourage women to think outside of some of the more stereotypical career paths. So I'm currently being mentored by a 24-year-old we just hired from university. She's done a computer science degree, and she's my mentor. And when you're getting mentored by somebody who's 24, it's a very interesting type of conversation. It's great though, it's refreshing. And I said to her, why did you do computer science? And she said to me, well, when she was in high school, her career advisor was saying, you're a really good talker, you should be a lawyer. And that was the type of advice she was getting. But when she looked up into the law firms, she didn't see people like her at the top of the pile. And if you look at law, 60% of law graduates in this country are women, but that's not what occurs when you get to the top of the law firms. So she went into computer science because she happened just to get a scholarship. But then she came to work for us because she could see she was going to report to a woman who reported to a woman who reported to a woman who reported to a woman. She said as she was being headhunted out of uni, that's one of the things she liked. She saw a path and a role model for her. So we've got to paint the picture for people. But I do think there is some system redesign that is needed as well. The system that we have, even around super and all of these things, they have been designed for a time when potentially participation of women wasn't as strong. If we want to tap into, in this economy, our number one natural asset, which is not under the ground, but above the ground, humans, we've got to build a system that supports the fact that actually we are different. Being inclusion isn't about saying I'm exactly the same as a guy. Actually, I am different. I am going to have some different needs. And so if I'm going to have to take some time off, if I choose to take time off to have a baby, and it's going to say we do want populations, we can't all stop having children. So we need to maybe say, what are we going to do to offset, the shortfalls in super for females when they do that, so they don't have to be reliant on other people, that they can sustain and support themselves in their later years and not be reliant on somebody else.
Jane, you're nodding vigorously. Do you want to jump in? What do you think?
I definitely agree with that. I think that, there's kind of two parts to it. Number one, we need to sort of draw a line in the sand and say, right, we've got to go back and fix all of us in this room that have been working for 10 or 15 or 20 years. We've got to fix the issue that we have left behind us. And then at some point, we've got to draw a line in the sand and say, we are not going to perpetuate the issue. We are not going to keep doing this so future generations are not having this same conversation. And I think that, you see initiatives like that from the ANZ Bank and actually many of our financial institutions and some of our largest companies like Telstra, for example, are very publicly putting a line in the sand and saying we need to fix what we've done, but we will commit moving forward to not continuing to make the same issues. And, people like the media throwing a light on this has been fantastic because it's become more normal for us to have conversations in our workplace about where the diversity and the equity is not hand in hand. So it's becoming easier to raise this in a corporate environment than it ever was. So we need to stop the issue from moving forward by giving young people, men and women, boys and girls, the expectation and the tools to believe that everybody is the same. And trust me, if anybody's got a kid here, from university down, they do not see diversity the way that we saw it in our generations. They simply do not see it. We also need to fix what we've got, and we need to do that by openly having conversations in our organisations about whether or not there are pay gaps between men and women. And I challenge you all in this room, and there is as many men here today as there are women, the brave of you will go back to your organisations and you just need to start to ask the question. And then there are levers and mechanisms to fill the gap. It's not always cash. It doesn't always have to hit the P&L. It doesn't have to be a financial decision that stops us from closing the gap. There's education, there's mentoring, there's coaching, there's opportunities, there's benefits, there's balance. All of these things can be traded to close the equity gap. And so I challenge all of you to go back to your organisations and do two things. Ask your own management team, ask your board, do we have this problem? What are we going to do about it? And I challenge you all to figure out how you're going to stop the problem from happening moving forward.
That's a big challenge.
They got a free lunch.
No, because it's interesting, you know, what you're talking about, kids don't see this gender gap. And part of the social media campaign of ANZ was to put the CEO and the chairman photos of them as kids to remind people of a time. I just want to read you a statistic from the Harvard Business School, which last year it interviewed 25,000 students on the way out. The findings revealed that more than 50% of men said that when they left business school, their careers would take priority over their partners. Researchers also asked two questions about childcare. How had graduates who were expecting to have partners and children, 91%, anticipating dividing childcare responsibilities? More than 75% expected their partner would do the lion's share of childcare, whereas only half the women expected they would do more. So when you've got this sort of stereotypical behaviour, and this is coming from, you know, young people who are just leaving business school, how do you, you know, it's not just the companies, they're hiring in their own image. Where do you start to tackle this problem?
You know, it's funny, sorry to jump in, but I was just thinking there, wouldn't it be interesting to do a statistical analysis or a correlation on that type of data and the rate of divorce? Because I'm telling you that the people that went into those relationships 20 years ago thinking that's why 2 out of 3 marriages fail in this day and age. It'd be really funny to look at that. I mean, you know, again, this is why I think it's generational, because a lot of the kids in these houses today, in our homes, I hope in all of our homes, and I'd be very happy to call your husband if this is not the case in your house. You know, a lot of our children are now seeing the work being shared very evenly between the male and the female, or the male and the male, or the female and the female, quite frankly. You know, they're really seeing the role models changing in the homes, and I do think this is generational, but I think it comes down to women not demanding more. You know, quite often, I could just lie down up here and have a little bit of therapy for 30 seconds or so. You know, I find myself getting really frustrated with something that my husband might do. My husband was 20 years Army, by the way. If you want somebody who knows how to run a household, marry a colonel like I did. He also knows where the weapons of mass destruction are. So, you know, I find myself getting very frustrated with him over certain things that he does. And then eventually I sit down and I said, you know what? When you do that, it drives me absolutely crazy. And he says to me, oh, well, I didn't know that. I'll just stop doing it then, shall I? And I think that one of the things that we don't do is we don't talk about what we need, what we expect, what we demand of the people, of men in our lives, whether it be at work or whether it be at home. We are not articulating what it is that's frustrating us. We are not articulating what our expectations are. We are not articulating what we believe should be ours, whether it's at home or at work. And I think that we need to start doing that more and stop being so silent within ourselves and accepting the status quo. Two women who never did that.
Tracy, what do you
I
think?
don't know where to go with the mass destruction and therapy. I mean, I think in relationships,
He can't find his keys, but he can find the weapons of mass destruction.
I think in relationships there is this point at which where careers there is a flexibility point point, and I'll say it a different way. So, I mean, when I got married, certainly my husband's career was, not certainly, my husband's career was, he was more senior than I was, and at a certain point, that balance changed. And there are people for whom that can be a real confidence or a security question. I was fortunate I had a husband who was as pleased with whatever career success I've had as I've been. But I think the where you start and where you end up and what people expect. When you leave business school, you may have an aspiration of I'm going to rule the world and I'm the master of the universe, and you know, life can be can mean different things happen. But I do think there's a point of the expectation, absolutely wrongly, is that once there are children involved, there is a default that when they're sick or something is wrong, that the person who is the primary person to fix that or to take on that responsibility is the female. And certainly in my house, it's much more skewed towards my husband than me. The school drop off and pick up is not me. And that unfortunately at the school my son is at, that is not the common thing. To my son, that's completely normal. Mom works, Mom is the person who does these things. Mom's the person who sometimes I get to see in a newspaper, and if I'm lucky, there's a picture of me in it, of him in it too. And so his world is, Mom has a job that has, you know, it has certain things about it, and Dad, actually my husband's retired, he's a bit older than me, and Dad doesn't. Now, the more that's common across all different combinations, not that, you know, fathers don't work, but all combinations, I do think it changes what our children see. But before it changes what our children see, I think there has to be an equity that people, if women want to have more senior positions, then there has to be a sharing of all ranges of responsibilities.
But Pip, how do you think we can change these stereotypical views?
Look, I'm going to tell you a story. I was asked to speak in an event. I won't say which event because I know there's press in the room and I'll get in trouble. And it was on disruption. And it was a breakfast event, and I was hosting the round table in the morning, and I sort of glanced at the people who were coming, but it wasn't until the morning I realised it was me and 19 men. Now, at a certain point in my life, that would have been good, but at this point I was like, oh, this isn't so good. So we get to the end of the breakfast, and the guy at the end of the table puts up his hand. He says to me, Pip, last question, I'm a father of 3. Why aren't there more women at this table? I said, great question. Let's ask the 18 men here. And so then at the end of those things, you know what it's like, and you'll do it here today. When you finish, you'll be walking around shaking hands, saying nice to meet you. I was walking around shaking hands with a few of the men at the end of the event, and the first guy goes, great conversation about diversity at the end. I went, oh, thank you. He goes, it's really hard because in my company, people just don't want to work for a woman. And I went, well, if you'd said I don't want to work for a man or somebody who is blind, what have you done about that? And he hadn't really tackled that. The second guy goes, well, no, that's not the problem in our company. In my company, it's not my fault. Women are leaving. And I went, oh, I said, well, let me ask you a question. When you lose a customer, do you fight to get them back? Yeah. I said, well, are you fighting to get these women back? Do you know why they're leaving? Oh, no, I think, they're just going. And I thought, okay, you've got women, don't want to work for managers, women leaving. And so I'm trying to talk to them about it. At this point, I think I better get out of here before I say something bad. And as I'm walking to the lift, the last guy says to me, and it was the clanger, he goes to me, thank you so much for coming. It must have been hard for you as a woman to make a 7:30 meeting. And I thought, I know, at this point it's deep breath. I'm sure he's a customer of ours, so deep breath. But what I would say is about these men were all lovely men, okay? And they all have wives, probably daughters, mothers. I don't believe there was any ill intent, but I am a big believer that there is an unconscious bias, okay? Unless you've got to look for bias and tackle it everywhere it exists. But if you don't look at it, and we all have biases. The woman sitting in this room, I have a bias. Okay, I've done one of those bias tests. I am biased towards female and towards career. So I have to watch that I'm not trying to just find other people like me. And so you've got to be aware of the biases you have, the things that you can put in the system to try and stop those biases existing. I encourage you all, and it's hard for us right now because we are talking about probably this glacial rate of change we've seen around gender. read the Harvard Business study Howard versus Heidi. It's one of my favorite ones. It's they've given these 2 case studies to the students, and they said, tell me about these executives. And it's exactly the same. The case study is exactly the same, but in one it's Howard, the CEO is Howard, and the other one it's Heidi. Howard is described as, great businessman, does great results, a strong leader. Heidi is a little bit selfish and blah, blah. The only thing different is the name, okay? So the bias exists. It exists in all of us. There's some great unconscious bias training. There's things we've got to do to flush that out and stop that continuing per Jane's earlier point.
So Jane, do you think we need some workplace intervention? Do we need more flexible, inclusive cultures? How do we do it?
We do. We need all of those things. And again, we need them to fix where we're at now. And we need programs in place to ensure that we're not bringing unconscious bias or conscious bias into the workplace moving forwards. It's interesting when you think about what some organisations have done to try to close this gap, really calling it out, really highlighting it. I know that I spend a lot of time working with quite a large number of programs for women that are certainly in the media and entertainment industry and in other industries. I quite often get asked to speak about things about the lessons that I've learned in my career, most of them the hard way, through tears. I get asked about, why I'm in this role and why I got there. And I do some work for Head Over Heels and Little Girl Big Dream and She Says, and there are a multitude of these organisations out there that are women with potential and women who are in great roles and great jobs who have got their hand out now to help other women up through the industry. And men, again, quite frankly, these are not exclusive programs. They tend to be dominated more by females. But I think as organisations, we need to look at implementing specific programs. We are the same, we just have different needs. I think you put that really beautifully. To look at programs that meet the different needs of women inside of organisations. And again, I'm seeing large numbers of those growing up. Just one comment that I would make around maternity leave and those things that a lot of people cite, a lot of women cite as a reason, why their career faltered, or the subsequent children that result at the end of a pregnancy as a reason why they go on and leave the organisation. I think that we have a much bigger problem looming ahead of us as a society, as an industry, in terms of carers' leave. We have this ageing population, we have people living longer than they did before, they're healthier for longer than they did before, and as they age, they have different needs than they did in the generations that we're dealing with now. I believe that the carers' leave issue will dwarf any issue around maternity leave from about 2018 onwards. We will need to completely rethink a full-time employment force versus a contingent workforce. We're going to need to bring back or rethink the sabbatical. We're going to bring back or rethink how we put on contract workers, because this issue is going to make maternity leave and all of the subsequent impacts that we're discussing now, it's going to make it look like a walk in the park. And so there's some of the things that I think that we should be looking at. Bring back the sabbatical and use that sabbatical for a number of reasons. It might be having a baby. It might be taking paternity leave. It might be caring for an aged relative. It might be studying an MBA. It might be having a gap time off in France for 6 months. I think one of the things that we need to do is really think through what extended periods of leave look like from work, and then simply slot maternity leave into a list of things that we're going to need to think about as the population ages.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And looking even more broader technology in Australia, it would be, I'd just like to ask Pip, where do you see Australia's place in the digital age in the next decade?
So I think we live, frankly, in the best country in the world. I love it, and it's funny because neither Tracy and I are born here, And so I think sometimes when you choose to live in a country, it even has a different sort of special connotation. So I love Australia. I think we have fared through some tough times globally, and we've been really lucky that we've had, strong terms of trade, and that's really helped us. I'm nervous about our future because I don't think that we have thought about what's going to drive our next wave of productivity. What does Australian made, and I don't need manufacturing, mean for the future of Australia? And when I think about technology, I laughed when Bill Gates said he used to want to put a PC on every desk in every home. In my house, I got 10 PCs, 5 tablets, 27 phones, and about 3 Xboxes. So that's the dream. But in Aussies, we're fast adopters of technology. We like to use it, but what are we doing to innovate?
We don't commercialise.
Yeah, I think our whole ecosystem, the innovation ecosystem in Australia, is still disjointed. We need to do a better job in bringing the innovation ecosystem together. So that's the academics, the startups, the government, big business, small business. It's still very disjointed. And so if we want the next, Pandora or Uber or Airbnb or Microsoft to be out of a country like this, then we've got to do a better job about creating the ecosystem that does that. And that means that we can have more Atlassians, because we've proven we can do some great stuff. Atlassian, great case study. Pity they moved their headquarters to, London, I think it was. So how do we have you not just start your business here, but grow your business here? We've got great position in Asia for us to take advantage of, so we should be looking at that. We've got some great work in healthcare. Look at the stuff Cochlear have done, ResMed have done. There's some great innovation in here, but there's just not enough of it. So we do need to, I think, focus on the environment that allows that to flourish more. So all the right settings. And it's not one thing, and it's not just government's job, by the way. We can't look to government. The guys at Atlassian or REA, they didn't wait for government to do something in order for them to innovate. They got on and innovate. Government has a role, but it is not the only part of the pie.
Are there any questions from the audience?
This many women in a room, you'd think.
Right, yeah, there we go. There we go.
That's it.
Why are we still having this conversation? I started at the age when I was 18, and being a girl, I was always given the childcare stories to write when the census came out. I reckon I filled out about 10 feasibility studies. Would the women who work here like to have childcare on site? Yes. Did it ever happen? I worked there 20 years. No, it did not. Why is it so slow, and how can we constructively, without whining or being shrill or anything that we don't like, how can we close the gap between what employers articulate and the reality for many working women?
Tracy?
Looking at me for the answer to that. I think we get tied up around what are the things that make it hard to do, and we stop with, and then we talk ourselves out of, well, it's difficult to put on-site childcare, and it's this, and there are some too. There's some barriers that don't make any of that easy, but we got to get smarter at finding what's the solutions to those things. Yeah. What are the ways you can do things where you can bring, there's some ways you can have access to care on site for when whatever childcare facilities you use, if your child is sick. There are things you can do that are emergent. We have to be much more flexible and dynamic with how we're trying to solve the problem. I think at the end of the day, we haven't made it as big a problem to solve. We can solve much more business complex problems, and yet this one, on many dimensions, shouldn't be that hard. It's imminently solvable. I think we let other people deal with it, and until it and we don't prioritize it the same way we do others. I'm brutally honest. I think that's why I haven't solved it anywhere I've been yet, and I don't feel good about that.
Maybe I would just add a couple of points. I think a little bit to Jane's comment about the ageing population. We're going to have a burning platform. Okay, we are going to need participation. We're going to need women in the workforce more than ever. Okay, because you look at the shape of our population curve. I think we've been a little bit too fat and happy. Australia, I mean, look at this country, it's amazing, but we haven't had the burning platform, and I think that's coming right at us, frankly. So I agree, with Jane's comment around that. And we need to participate, we've got to be participants here in our own rescue. We need to make sure that as the politicians and the people starting to frame some of these settings that help companies support this, we need some women in those political positions having a strong voice and representing the diversity of this great country, which is 51% women. So I think we really need to see women at the top having those discussions, because it goes back to the point I think Tracy said at the start. When you have groupthink, if not having a diverse group of people looking at that problem, you're going to have people not necessarily understanding the problem. And if you think about even like design thinking, that human-centered design, empathy and understanding for that challenge and what we need to do is really important. And I think we've got to step up and help drive that. And there's a lot of energy around that. But we need some women in some senior positions too in our political landscape to help drive some change as well.
Will I make a comment?
Yeah, you can.
I think the other thing on that is we quite often, and I have certainly been in this position in the last 25 years of my working, we quite often talk about something that we're going to need in an organisation. We're going to need this, we're going to need childcare, we're going to need a pinball machine, we're going to need whatever it is. It's a survey, or it's a group of people talking, or the CEO wanders the halls and asks people what they want. This is what we need. We're going to need this. It's no good to just articulate what the problem is. You have to be willing to be part of the solution. And I say this to the guys that work at Pandora all the time. Don't come to me with the problem. I can see the problem. I know what the problem is. Come to me with the solutions for how you think we're going to resolve it. You've got to be prepared to get in and do the work, not just commentate on what you see as the issues in your organisation. We need childcare. Great. Who else needs it? There are 7 of us with small children. There are 4 of us who are pregnant. There's a group of us now. What are the options for childcare? There are nannies. There are creches. There's daycare on site. There's this. Right. What are all the options that we can look at? Right. Who's going to look at daycare? Who's going to look at on-site? Who's going to look at insurance? Who's going to look at schools? Who's going to look at the cost of nannies? Who's going to look at shared nannies? Who's going to do the work? And then you take that case and you say, we've looked at the options. Here's our value to the organisation. Collectively, we brought you $5 million worth of revenue. That's what's at risk here. Without childcare, we are all going to leave. It's going to cost you $450,000 per annum, including insurance, to provide that. $5,450,000. It's a simple example. It's not as easy as that. But my point is, in articulating issues, we as women have a responsibility to be part of the solution. Don't drop it on the doorstep of HR or the male CEO. Don't drop it and point at it and go, oh, that's dreadful, it's still the same. So I would say, what have you done? What have you done to change the world? What have you done to get the childcare? What have you done to get the coffee machine? What did you do? Where is your alliance? Where is your cohort? Where are women and men who think and feel like you? And technology is making it easier for us to do that, to find platforms and voices and support and research and business cases and putting our things forward. So my fear is that we continue to articulate the problem and then we drop it and run. And we can't keep doing that. We've got to be part of the solutions.
And when you're putting a dollar figure on the solution and the problem, it certainly gets people to take notice. There was someone over here who was... No, that's okay. No? Oh, just over here.
Hi, Luke Littlefield. I'd be really interested to know what you guys have... We've spoken a little bit about disruption and disruption to businesses and businesses being disrupted. From my perspective, to address this issue, we're going to have to disrupt our own businesses and disrupt a hundreds of years old hierarchical system that exists in organisations that people follow because there are Harvard business papers on it and that sort of thing. And I think for me, and we talk a little bit about this in our organisation, is that we're going to need to disrupt the hierarchy and the system of years to get an outcome, or we're going to end up somewhat back where we always start. So I guess I'm interested to know what disruption you guys have caused in your organisation around traditional hierarchies that may be getting us closer to a solution, because I know we're talking a bit about it.
So I wouldn't say we've solved the traditional hierarchy problem, but one of the things we've looked at is what are the interventions you need that where good ideas or different approaches can be quickly flushed up through the system, and how do you give them a platform to get aired, funded, and started. And actually an idea came from one of our first line managers that said we need something. They use the comparison of Shark Tank, you know, the idea, we have a lot of very smart people across the company, and they have of ideas that can be off a current product plan or what we're invested in, but you have this sense you need to incubate them or at least try and see, even beyond some of the R&D we do. So they created it themselves. They asked for funding from the leadership group, which we did. Actually, one of the creators is in the room here today. And they put the system in place. Ideas came forward. There were just under 50 across the organization. They helped people spec them. Then they came up with the finalists. They had 6 as the finalists. We created a panel of people, so we made it a bit of an event. We listened to the ideas. Of the ideas, 3 got some level of support and funding, and we had our kickoff last week, and we announced it to the organization. Now, is that a perfect example of what you're saying and turning all traditional hierarchies on its head? No. But what I was really impressed with the team who came forward to myself and the leadership team with it is, so we want to take this through to getting the ideas in a state where you can make decisions, and then we want to help those people once they have the funding to get them through to at least that first phase of try something, fail fast, or we go to the next phase. And so it was recognizing that the people who came up with that's a group of 4 people from across our business who don't work together in any team. They're at all different levels. They're of all different functions. And they've come together to say, this is a great need. We've put money behind it, and now they feel an accountability that says, now how do we help these people be able to get the resources, prove or disprove their idea, and go into round 2. That's at least it's an intervention. It's not perfect, but it's one intervention that we've done.
Yeah, I love that story. For me, the way I think about it is it's cultural, okay? Because at the end of the day, technology doesn't innovate, the people do. You know, some random system didn't bring Tracy the idea, the people did. And so what are you doing to create a culture where innovation and disruption is not just welcome, but actually encouraged and embraced? So I think about things like forget hierarchies, tap into networks. You know, people closest to the work know the work. You know, they're the people who are seeing the opportunities, the friction in the system. So how can you tap into that? How can you move away from a world of control to trust and empowerment, where people can feel like they can bring the ideas, they can try new things, and actually, where is it okay to fail? Fail fast, frequently, and frugally. And that's what I want people to do. Those are my F's of failure. So if you can get those things into your culture, then that starts to happen. And the worst thing that you can have, the one do not, I would say, is fear kills creativity. If you have a culture where it's not okay to fail, where it's not okay to bring the boss the new idea because it didn't come from the boss, that's a bad, bad thing. So I say it's all, you know, culture eats strategy for lunch or breakfast or dinner or any meal of the day. Smorgasbord. Buffet.
I think just quickly, because we're a bit running close on time. Prior to running Pandora, I was the chief executive at Fairfax Digital. I started there in 2006 and I ended up leaving in 2012. And I went in as the general manager, in fact, of digital, which was all of the digital businesses inside of a very, very traditional and very old media company. And in some ways, it felt like the longest 6 years of my life. And in some ways, when I look back on it, 6 years actually isn't very long at all for the type of transformation that company was able to achieve. The Fairfax Digital was an incubated business unit inside of Fairfax, and it had its own floor and its own journalists and its own everything. And it was just simply a unit that existed inside of Fairfax, and it was responsible for the digital world, moving into the digital world. And, you know, they were tough times for a long time for everybody as we went through enormous change. I left there in 2012 because my job disappeared. the job of the Chief Executive Officer of Fairfax Digital was no longer required. And it was no longer required because a strategic decision had been made by the company that digital would then underpin every single thing that the company did. And when you think about 6 years in that respect, it was enormously fast. So it was incubated, it was challenging, but there were some very clear results that happened as a result of that, and we moved on. The other comment that I'll make is to refer to my favourite ever business book. And, you know, back in the early 90s, Steve Ballmer had taken over as the chief executive. I don't know if you guys were around, but he ran this Book of the Month club for all employees. And he'd find this great book, Good to Great, Who Says Elephants Can't Dance? We'd all get one. He'd ship them around the world, and we'd all get these books. And 1 month he sent me this book that remains my favourite, and I think it is more true now than when it was first published 20 years ago. And it's this fantastic book called Who Moved My Cheese? And it was by a guy called John Spencer. And he literally, it was published 20 years ago, and it was a parable. It was a fable. And you could read it in an hour and a half. And essentially, you know, the upshot of the story was that the mouse kept looking for the cheese. Two sets of mice kept looking for cheese. The cheese moved. One set of mice went back looking for the cheese in the same place every day and eventually died because the cheese had moved. The other set of mice went back looking for the cheese, realised it was gone, so started to find ways to find new cheese. When you're looking at transformation inside of a company, seriously get a copy of the book and then explain to your executive officers what the cheese is. At Fairfax, the cheese were the readers. The cheese had moved. And we had to find a way to explain that the new cheese was in the digital areas, and eventually we all got to the new cheese and they continue to eat. And I'm sure that's not the last of that fable, but anyway, that's the way I end it. But you know, none of these are new problems. None of these are problems that haven't been solved. That book is a great way to start, to just train people to think about when the cheese has moved and it's your revenue and it's your customers, stop looking for the cheese where it once was.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause please for our panel. Look, outstanding discussion, and on behalf of the Melbourne Press Club, and I'm sure everybody in the room, can I extend huge thanks to our panellists, Pip, and to Tracy and Jane. You've really helped us today dwell deep into the issue. You've touched on some vexed issues, absolutely, and we'll all leave this room a little bit brighter, and we better understand both issues. What a great discussion. A discussion, by the way, that if you haven't noticed, is trending. It was the top trend in Australia for all of the 45 minutes that you're on stage. And that makes a difference. I'm sure Karen in San Francisco will be happy to hear that. What have we learnt? Well, if I may just do a bit of a recap, we've learnt that a recorded message perhaps isn't always foolproof. Perhaps we should have gone with Periscope, Mark. We've learnt that Pip's mum's a nun, but Jane calls her kids Satan and Lucifer. And we've also learnt that her husband's lethal. We've learnt that it was probably a man that was an influential figure in all of these leaders' lives, in Steve Vamos, and he gave them that inspiration when he said that he believed in them. There's certainly unison when it comes to diversity. It makes you think differently, we heard, and Tracy, of course, said that it's a key for success. Jane pondered if the issue of women in business might just go away eventually, but certainly that's not good enough because that'll be too slow. Jane also is certain that coding, technology, engineering and softer industries alike require creativity and problem solving, and our kids are doing that every day. Jane also challenges to ask tough questions when we go back to our workplaces about the gender gap. Apparently, reverse mentoring works, Pip, and and we also need to go and hunt for bias. Pip's nervous about our future because of the ecosystem in which it operates. Certainly, it's disjointed. Innovation ecosystems are key for our future. Apparently, we can't rely on government. Innovation is a responsibility for all of us. We're a bit fat and happy, and we need women in our workforce because it's an ageing workforce. Disruption certainly is a cultural thing, and that's where we'll find the solution. There's a lot of ground covered, and you can catch up on all of it via the Melbourne Press Club website, where there'll be a video package of today's session. Also, tap into the to the Twitter feed via Digifuture MPC, which is still trending. Thanks very much to Adele Ferguson. Adele is a revered and everywhere woman. Adele, your skillful moderation around a complex debate during what we know is a busy time for you was tremendous. For each of our panellists today, we have a copy of Media Legends, journalists who've helped shape Australia. It's a lavish book, as you can see. Thank you, Jim. And it honours 81 foundation members of the Victorian Media Hall of Fame. It's a great read, expertly edited, I might add, by the Press Club's own Mark Baker and Mike Smith. Panellists, we give this to you today in thanks, but perhaps also in some expectation that in years to come, a similar book might be published that chronicles the contribution you've made to Australia's digital future. And we would like to see that take place, that's for sure. Look, there's no doubt that you will leave today inspired, and you know, we've heard a lot about what we can do. Isn't it true, though, that when we go to lunches like this, we return to our priority lists and our pressing work matters and do little? When Haystack started designing this event last year with the Press Club, we didn't want to leave our work in this room. We didn't want to leave our work with just the job of corralling these busy leaders. Having been in the trenches with some manufacturing and mining companies over the years, and indeed worked with some booming .com and consumer tech businesses, we've seen firsthand that Australia's business landscape is shifting. Along the way, we've also been a keen observer on the vexed issue around women in business. That's, of course, because our industry attracts a lot of talented women. So to turn our knowledge into and our interest into action and to ultimately make a difference, we partnered with an organisation called Springboard Australia. It helps profile women-led enterprises. Springboard's work ensures that enterprises are investor-ready, and interestingly, most participants in Springboard's programs are focused on IT, biotech, financial services and telcos, the softer sectors. What's been exposed here is that there is a funding gap when it comes to entrepreneurialism, and it's resulting in an underperformance of half of our population. We want to do something about it, and so we've continued to work with Springboard, and we're making some ground. Today's impressive lineup of leaders perhaps puts some proof that women can break this nexus. If you'd like to hear more about our work with Springboard, the gentleman over there to the left of the panel is Jim Stiliadis. Jim's our head of corporate, and he leads the pro bono relationship that we have with Springboard. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our luncheon today. Thank you all for joining us. If you'd like, as I said, a replay of the highlights of today, you can visit the Press Club website, where a video package will be available very soon. Once again, we thank our panellists. A big round of applause for them. Thanks also to our event organisers. It's a power of work to get these things done. And to all of you, our guests today, can we wish you all the very best with your digital futures. Thank you.